Hi there, my name is Darren Loggy, and in this video I'm going to be discussing the struggle that is becoming known in pop culture as the chip war, the conflict between China, the United States, and Taiwan as they battle over semiconductors, the chips that are used in many highly powerful computing devices. And I will be concluding this video with a brief discussion of how we can apply schools of thought within international relations to this conflict. Before I get too far into the subject matter at hand, though, I would like to begin by acknowledging and recommending Chris Miller's 2022 book, Chip War, which is going to serve as the basis for a lot of the topics in this video today. So if this catches your attention, please give it a read. But let's start off by defining some of our terms here. Now, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, when I say the word chips, what I'm really referring to are semiconductors, which for environmental as well as reasons relating to the conduction of electricity, they're largely made out of silicon, and we really find them in most modern electronics. Now, the way that semiconductors function is through a process known as doping, which was posited by the inventor of semiconductors, theoretical physicist William Shockley. Now, doping is the theory that a semiconductor won't actually conduct electricity on its own unless it is interacting with another more conductive element. The earliest semiconductors would use more abstract materials such as gold filaments and germanium in order to produce the electric signal that they wanted to from these semiconductors. So not only did this small-scale chemical process allow for computers to emit a greater variance of signals, but it also made computers much smaller in general, because before the time of the semiconductor, computers displayed binary language utilizing large metal tubes encased in glass, which, when electronically activated, would convey a 1, and when turned off, would convey a 0. In modern times, though, we see these variety use semiconductors really falling into three different categories. The first one being logic chips, which are used for computing in smartphones and computers. Memory chips, which are used in the short-term memory of those same devices. These are also very expensive to make. And then diverse specialized chips, which do just a very large swath of varied tasks. As seen in this picture, semiconductors which work on radio frequencies would be considered a specialized chip. But more relevantly to this video, what is the importance of the semiconductor chips in Taiwan? Now, first of all, just to get it out of the way, Taiwan, which officially calls itself the Republic of China, views itself as its own sovereign state, while of course the People's Republic of China, which is, more modernly referred to as just China, views Taiwan as a part of their country. Now, anyways, though, Taiwan's long-term goal is to shift its economy from the production of mass-produced cheap goods to more futuristic and manufacturing products. That being said, in the process, it would become less dependent on China. And we see this effort manifest itself through a 2017 initiative that saw the establishment of 4 different research centers in Taiwan related to the development of AI. This is an effort that would cost Taiwan $33 million over the course of 5 years. And of course, famously, in January of 2018, the Republic of China, or Taiwan, pushed out its 3-year AI Taiwan plan. So it is absolutely worth noting that the majority of US companies that work on designing semiconductor chips outsource the actual production and making of those chips to corporations in the global south like Taiwan. For instance, the company Nvidia and Qualcomm, these US-based companies, provide designs for chips, but ultimately they're produced by the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company across the Pacific Ocean, as well as Samsung has a large hand in producing these semiconductor chips as well. This is a company that resides in Taiwan itself. So because of Taiwan's importance in the world's supply of semiconductors, a conflict with China or any other foreign actor could set the world supply of semiconductors back by years. And this cannot be understated, because if Taiwan's chip production were to halt, the world would lose 37% of its computing power per inactive year of Taiwanese semiconductor production. Of course, because it is so important to the world's supply of semiconductors, there is a certain silicon shield of sorts, a coin termed by Chris Miller in his book, which means that generally the world wants to protect Taiwan from foreign actors as well as natural disasters, because ultimately the stability of the semiconductor industry depends on the leaders of China, Taiwan, and the US. Well, cutting to the chase, the question that we really want to ask ourselves here is Taiwan effectively protected? Now, unfortunately, Beijing's right to forcefully unify Taiwan with China if peaceful means became impossible was codified into Chinese law in 2005. Furthermore, we see China perpetually engaging in military operations around Taiwan in order to test its preparedness. More specifically, there's a lot of air operations that encroach on Taiwanese airspace perpetuated by Chinese forces, as well as their navy crossing borders on the sea. Now, the Biden administration does not support independence for Taiwan, but Taiwan and the U.S. have shared unofficial defense ties since 1980. The U.S. doesn't exactly consider itself an ally of Taiwan or an ally of China. Rather, it stands with a position of strategic ambiguity while bolstering Taiwan's porcupine strategy. Essentially, this means that any attacker of Taiwan is going to get poked because from 2020 to 2024, Taiwan was actually the largest purchaser of defense weapons through the U.S.'s foreign military sales process. U.S. officials have labeled a Chinese invasion of Taiwan as neither imminent nor inevitable. However, on the other hand, Xi Jinping has ordered the People's Liberation Army to be ready for an invasion by 2027. So, is Taiwan effectively protected? There's truly no way of knowing until something happens. But what actions have been taken in the actual chip war itself so far? Well, firstly, as Chris Miller illustrates in his book on the subject, the interests of Silicon Valley and the U.S. military have always been intertwined. Sweeping scientific innovations that take place in Silicon Valley have inherent interest to the U.S. government, and by default, they have interest to its military. Furthermore, we've seen countries like Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan all make sweeping progress within the semiconductor production industry by generously funding research, establishing cooperative relationships with foreign actors, and actually taking advantage of the competition within Silicon Valley to keep their processes efficient. Furthermore, we also see a trend towards the weaponization of intellectual property within the chip war, because to prevent competitions, actors within this conflict can cite theft of intellectual property as the technology develops. Finally, we've also seen these 2023 export controls greatly limiting China's access to chips made from American technology. Now, naturally, China has said that this was a very unfair effort to protect the US's technological hegemony, but it is predicted either way that these measures will only delay, not stop, Chinese chip development. And very famously, as we see in this picture on the right here of Joe Biden, proud of the construction, the groundbreaking of the TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company facility in Arizona, which is going to give the U.S. even further of a leg up in the conflict. Well, how can we apply schools of thought within international relations to this chip war conflict? Well, firstly, from a realist perspective, in order to avoid a violent invasion of Taiwan from China, any provocative military operation towards Taiwan needs to be met with an equal response from Taiwan itself or potentially one of its foreign allies. Because the bottom line is that China, a rational actor with a strong military, has codified a forcible reunification with Taiwan. And so we need to prepare for that threat as rational actors ourselves. On the other side of the coin, though, there's also something to be said for the rational argument that because the US and Taiwan are generally doing better on the semiconductor production front, that the US staying the course with strategic ambiguity is the best way to go. To further illustrate this, I'll bring up the fact that China has only a 6% market share over the entire semiconductor supply chain in the world. Almost all of them, though, can be produced elsewhere, and China is wholly dependent on the US for the design of those logic and memory chips. Naturally, of course, this would all change if China invaded Taiwan, but even if they did and somehow retained 100% of the Republic of China's semiconductor supply, they would own only 18% of the world's supply chain of semiconductors afterwards, as opposed to the US's 39%. From a liberal perspective, we have to place a lot of strength on the backs of international institutions. And even though the sovereignty of the Republic of China within Taiwan isn't recognized by large peacekeeping organizations like NATO and the UN, any violent action towards Taiwan would still face their scrutiny and potential intervention. Cooperative treaties, though, between China and the US, with the goal of ensuring even international development of the semiconductor industry, would negate scarcity and potentially negate the need for an invasion. Of course, it is worth noting that under the pretense of strategic ambiguity, Taiwan cannot be involved or even named in this treaty-making process because doing so would mean acknowledging the Republic of China's sovereignty. Now, should cooperation with China become unattainable, economic weapons such as sanctions or intellectual property rights, strictly and evenly enforced by international institutions, could incentivize China. But I actually wanted to end this video by introducing an approach to the chip war that would actually combine two different schools of thought within international relations, which would be constructivism and anarchism, for a melding which I'm going to be calling constructive anarchism. Now, the basis for this school of thought is just that there's certainly something to be said for the argument that what's best for the development of technology would be to end any policy that could have a negative effect on that development, which would include purposefully interfering with another country's semiconductor industry. Because violence in Taiwan over chips would be tragic, and it is wholly avoidable. But competition between foreign actors trying to retain influence in the area is leading to a lack of progress in the development of the technology itself. Furthermore, a system based on anarchy would create a wholly unregulated market, which could present some sweeping innovations in spite of creating new dangers. Now, constructivism comes into play here because in order to institute this more anarchic development of semiconductors internationally, we would have to reframe the public's conceptions about chips and the computational power that they create. Essentially, we would want to reframe the public dialogue around chips from them being a revolutionary technology that needs to be kept out of the hands of bad actors at all costs, and move it more towards an unknown technology whose development is of more importance than its ownership. Thank you all for watching this video. Above, you will see listed the various citations that I used to produce the information that I went over here. If you all have any interest in the chip war or this conflict in general, I would highly suggest looking into them. Thank you, and have a great day.